I was sitting in my penthouse office, looking out over the city skyline that I had helped shape with 35 buildings bearing my name when I finished a call with investors about my latest $200 million development project. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, just as I was wrapping the special wedding gift I had been preparing for my little sister Lily. The message hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're not coming to the wedding. Lily's family doesn't want you there." I stared at the screen in complete disbelief. Before I tell you how I made them realize exactly who they had just crossed, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and if you have ever been underestimated by your own family, smash that like button. Subscribe because what I did next will prove that revenge is a dish best served with a side of financial ruin. Let me explain exactly who I am and what my family was about to lose. My name is Renee Morrison, and at 32, I own Morrison Holdings, a real estate empire worth over $200 million. I started with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from my grandfather when I was 25, buying my first fix and flip property in a neighborhood everyone said was hopeless. 7 years later, I owned 35 buildings across the city, from luxury condominiums to commercial complexes that housed the businesses everyone relied on. But here is what made this betrayal so much more devastating. My family had no idea how much I had been supporting them behind the scenes. My parents, Patricia and Frank Morrison, still lived in the same middle-class neighborhood where I grew up. They had always been proud people who refused direct financial help from me, claiming they did not want to owe their daughter anything or become charity cases. Their pride meant everything to them, so I found creative ways to help without damaging their self-respect. 3 years ago, when they were facing foreclosure on their house, I arranged for an anonymous donation to pay off their $300,000 mortgage completely. They thought it was some kind of banking error that got resolved in their favor. When my sister Lily wanted to pursue her master's degree in education but could not afford the $60,000 tuition, I set up a fake scholarship fund and made sure she was the recipient. She believed she had earned it through academic merit alone. My sister Lily was now 29 and worked as an elementary school teacher, engaged to James Parker, a lawyer from what they considered a prestigious family. James came from old money, the kind of wealth that had been passed down through generations rather than earned through hard work and smart investments like mine. His parents, Theodore and Eleanor Parker, represented everything I despised about inherited privilege. They looked down on anyone who had built their success from nothing. What I discovered later was that the Parker family had been doing research on me for months. They knew about my real estate business, and in their minds, property development was somehow beneath their refined sensibilities. They saw me as new money, the kind of person who made their wealth from other people's misfortune through foreclosures and tenant management. To them, I was not classy enough to associate with their carefully curated social circle. The irony was bitter and perfect. While they were judging my business ethics, I had been secretly supporting the very wedding they were planning to exclude me from. When Lily had come to me months earlier asking for advice about wedding venues, I had suggested the historic Grand Manor, a beautiful estate that I happened to own but had never mentioned to my family. She booked it immediately, gushing about how perfect it was and how lucky she felt to secure such an exclusive location. What Lily did not know was that I was not just recommending the venue. I was the landlord. The same was true for nearly every vendor she had hired for her wedding. The catering company operated out of a building I owned, and I held the mortgage on their equipment and vehicles. The wedding photographer rented studio space in one of my commercial properties on a month-to-month lease that I could terminate with proper notice. Even the florist business that Lily had fallen in love with was partially funded by my investment as a silent partner. My family had built their entire celebration on the foundation of my financial empire while simultaneously allowing the Parker family to convince them that my money was somehow dirty or inappropriate. The web of financial connections I controlled was so extensive that I could unravel their entire wedding with a few phone calls, and they would never see it coming because they had never bothered to learn the details of my business empire. I had spent years building relationships and acquiring properties, not just for profit, but because I understood that real power came from controlling the infrastructure that other people depended on. Every mortgage I held, every lease I had written, every business partnership I had carefully constructed was now a potential lever I could pull to demonstrate exactly what life looked like without my support. My first reaction was to call Lily directly, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. Finally, I texted my mother back, "So you chose status over blood." Her response came quickly. "The Parker family thinks your business is inappropriate for their circle. You will understand someday." That was when I knew I needed to understand exactly what had happened behind the scenes. I called Marcus Webb, the private investigator I kept on retainer for business purposes. Within 2 hours, he had uncovered the full extent of the Parker family's campaign against me. Eleanor Parker had spent weeks researching my business background, digging into every property transaction, every tenant dispute, and every foreclosure I had ever been involved with. She had found a recent lawsuit from a tenant who claimed I had been too aggressive in collecting rent, conveniently ignoring the fact that the court had ruled in my favor because the tenant had not paid in 8 months. She had compiled a dossier of my business practices and presented it to my parents as evidence that I was, in her words, predatory and unethical. When I called my father Frank, his voice was strained and apologetic. "Renee, honey, the Parkers explained some things about your business that we did not understand. They said real estate developers make money from other people's misfortune and that your reputation could hurt James's career prospects. We thought maybe it would be better if you kept a low profile just for this one day." The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. My own parents had been convinced that the daughter who had built a business empire from nothing was somehow a source of shame rather than pride. They had allowed strangers to poison their minds against me without even asking for my side of the story. When Lily finally answered my call the next morning, her voice was cold and distant. "Renee, this day is not about you. James's family has standards and your business reputation precedes you. Maybe it is time you found a more respectable career anyway." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My sister, whose education I had secretly funded, whose mortgage I had secretly paid off, was lecturing me about respectability while planning to marry into a family that looked down on honest work. "What exactly do you think I do for a living, Lily?" I asked. "You evict people from their homes and make money from their suffering," she replied clearly, parroting Eleanor Parker's talking points. "James's family has worked very hard to maintain their reputation in this community." That afternoon, Eleanor Parker herself called my office. Her voice dripped with condescension as she explained her position. "Miss Morrison, surely you understand that our family has worked very hard to maintain our reputation. Your business dealings with tenants and properties create a certain image problem. James's future depends on the right social connections, and we simply cannot have any association with questionable business practices." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for several minutes, processing the full scope of what had happened. Not only had the Parker family successfully poisoned my own family against me, but they had done it while my family was unknowingly living off the profits from the very business they now considered shameful. I pulled out my financial records and began to map out exactly how much support I had been providing without acknowledgement. The mortgage payoff, the education funding, plus dozens of smaller interventions over the years, picking up restaurant bills during family dinners, paying for car repairs when my parents thought insurance had covered it, anonymously funding my mother's medical expenses when she had surgery last year. The total came to over $400,000 in direct financial support, plus the countless business connections and opportunities I had provided without credit. They had been living a better life because of my success, while allowing other people to convince them that my success was something to be ashamed of. That was the moment I realized they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about gratitude and respect. I started with the venue because I knew it would create immediate panic with no time for alternatives. I called the property manager at the historic Grand Manor and delivered the news in my most professional tone. "This is Renee Morrison. I am closing the venue for emergency renovations effective immediately." The manager's voice went up several octaves. "Ma'am, there is a wedding tomorrow with 200 guests. The Morrison Parker wedding has been planned for months." "I understand that, but the building has developed structural issues that make it unsafe for large gatherings. I am liable for any accidents, so the closure is non-negotiable." Within an hour, Lily was calling my phone in hysterics, but I let it go to voicemail. The venue was scrambling to find alternatives, but every reputable location in the city was already booked for weekend weddings, especially on such short notice. Next, I moved on to the vendors, starting with the catering company. I called the bank that held their equipment loan, a loan that I had personally guaranteed as part of a business favor 6 months earlier. "This is Renee Morrison calling about the Morrison Catering Equipment Loan. I am withdrawing my personal guarantee effective immediately." The loan officer was confused. "Ms. Morrison, this will trigger an immediate review of their creditworthiness. Without your guarantee, they may be required to pay the full balance immediately." I understand the implications perfectly. Morrison Catering received a phone call within the hour demanding immediate payment of $80,000 or cessation of operations. They had been relying on my financial backing without realizing it, and now that backing was gone, the photography studio was next. Since the photographer rented space in one of my buildings on a month-to-month lease, I had the legal right to terminate with proper 30-day notice. However, I also discovered that they had been consistently late with rent payments, which gave me grounds for immediate termination. "This is Renee Morrison regarding the Henderson photography lease. Due to repeated late payments, I am terminating the lease immediately for breach of contract." The photographer would not only lose their studio space, but would also be unable to fulfill their commitment to the wedding, since all their equipment and editing setup was in the soon-to-be inaccessible studio. For the florist, I exercised my rights as a silent partner in the business. I called an emergency partner meeting and demanded immediate dissolution of the partnership, which required them to buy out my share or close their doors. Since they did not have the capital for a buyout, they would be unable to fulfill any current orders. But I was just getting started. The nuclear option was revealing the true source of my family's financial stability. I drove to my parents' house that evening with a folder full of documents. When I walked in, both my parents and Lily were there, frantically making phone calls trying to salvage the wedding. "We need to talk," I announced, spreading bank statements and mortgage documents across their dining room table. "Renee, this is not the time," my mother started, but I cut her off. "Actually, this is the perfect time. I want you to look at these documents and tell me what you see." My father picked up the mortgage paperwork, his face growing pale as he read. "What is this?" "Those are the records showing that I paid off your house 3 years ago. $300,000 paid through an anonymous donation that you thought was some kind of banking error." The room went silent, except for the sound of papers rustling as they examined the evidence. "And these," I continued laying out more documents, "show that I funded Lily's entire graduate education, $60,000 in tuition and expenses paid through a scholarship fund that I created specifically for her." Lily's face went white. "That is not possible. I earned that scholarship." "You earned it by being my sister. But since you all seem to think my money is dirty and inappropriate, I am sure you will want to pay it back." I pulled out one more set of documents. I have already contacted the university's financial aid office and the bank that holds your mortgage. The anonymous donations have been revoked, and you now owe the full amounts with current interest rates. My father was staring at the papers in shock. Renee, we had no idea. That was the point. I did not want to hurt your pride by making you feel like charity cases. But since the Parker family has convinced you that my business is unethical, I assume you do not want to benefit from the profits anymore. I had saved the best revelation for last. Earlier that day, Marcus had finished his investigation into the Parker family's finances, and what he discovered was delicious in its irony. There is one more thing you should know, I said, pulling out a final folder. Theodore Parker's law firm is in serious financial trouble. They are facing 3 malpractice lawsuits. Their malpractice insurance has been canceled, and 2 of their major partners are planning to leave. Their old money is mostly gone, and they are living on credit and appearances. I smiled as I delivered the final blow. As of this afternoon, I bought their debt from the bank. I am now their creditor. So while they have been lecturing you about my questionable business ethics, they owe me money. The chaos that followed was everything I had hoped for and more. My phone was ringing constantly with vendors, venue, managers, and wedding guests, all trying to understand what had happened. The Parker family was scrambling to find alternatives while simultaneously dealing with their own financial crisis. James called that evening, his voice shaking with anger and confusion. "What have you done to our wedding?" "I have done nothing to your wedding," I replied calmly. "I have simply removed my financial support from an event where I was not welcome. Apparently, my money was good enough to fund everything, but I was not good enough to attend." The immediate aftermath was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The wedding was postponed indefinitely because there was simply no way to secure a venue, catering flowers, and photography on zero notice. Word spread quickly through the local social scene about the Parker family's financial troubles, and their carefully maintained reputation crumbled overnight. My parents spent the first week frantically trying to figure out how they were going to handle mortgage payments they had not expected to make. They had been living comfortably on their combined teacher and mechanic salaries when they thought the house was paid off, but suddenly facing a monthly payment of $1,800 with current interest rates was devastating to their budget. Lily was equally panicked about the student loan debt that had suddenly appeared on her credit report. As a teacher, her salary could barely cover her current living expenses, much less an additional monthly payment of $600 for educational debt she thought had been forgiven. Within 2 weeks, my entire family was at my office asking for a meeting. They looked tired and stressed, finally understanding the scope of what they had lost when they chose the Parker family's approval over their relationship with me. "Renee, we made a terrible mistake." My father began, his voice heavy with regret. "We never realized how much you had been helping us. We took it all for granted." My mother was crying softly. "We let strangers poison our minds against our own daughter. The Parker family made your business sound like something criminal, and we believed them without even asking you to explain. But I was not ready to forgive and forget. They had made their choice, and now they needed to live with the consequences long enough to truly understand what they had done. The damage is already done," I told them. "You chose to believe the worst about me based on gossip from people who do not even know me. You decided that your relationship with me was worth less than social approval from the Parker family." Eleanor Parker had attempted to reach out to me several times, first through angry voicemails demanding that I reverse my actions, then through increasingly desperate messages as their own financial situation became untenable. Theodore Parker even offered to provide free legal services in exchange for debt forgiveness, not realizing that I had better lawyers than he could ever afford. James broke up with Lily, 6 weeks after the canceled wedding. He told her that he could not marry into a family with such financial instability and drama. The irony was perfect. He left her because of the money problems that only existed because his family had convinced her to reject the sister who could have solved all of them. But the most important change was in how I approached family relationships going forward. I realized that my anonymous generosity had actually enabled their lack of appreciation. By hiding my help, I had allowed them to take my support for granted while never acknowledging my success or contributions. I set new terms for any future relationship. If I was going to help my family financially, it would be transparent and acknowledged. If they wanted to benefit from my business success, they needed to respect that business and the hard work it represented. Most importantly, they needed to understand that love without respect was not really love at all. 6 months later, my parents had downsized to a smaller house and were openly accepting my financial support with gratitude instead of shame. Lily had taken a job with my company, learning about real estate and property management while paying off her educational debt. They attended my business events with pride instead of embarrassment, finally understanding that my success was something to celebrate rather than hide. The Parker family quietly left town after their law firm collapsed, and they lost their house to foreclosure. The old money they had been so proud of turned out to be mostly debt and delusion, and without the income from the law firm, they could not maintain their lifestyle or their social standing. I learned that generosity without acknowledgement breeds entitlement rather than gratitude. I discovered that my family should be my biggest supporters, not my biggest critics. Most importantly, I realized that I should never apologize for success I had earned through hard work and smart decisions. Today, my business empire continues to grow, but now it is built on relationships of mutual respect rather than hidden charity. My family works alongside me, contributing to the success they also benefit from. Lily is engaged to someone who admires strong, successful women rather than being intimidated by them. The greatest lesson I learned was that sometimes you have to take away what people take for granted to make them understand its true value. My family thought my money was dirty until they had to live without it. They thought my business was shameful until they realized it had been supporting their lifestyle all along. Have you ever had family members who were embarrassed by your success instead of proud of it? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Share your story in the comments below and hit that like button if this reminded you that your worth is not negotiable. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when the people who should support you choose to tear you down instead. Please share this with anyone who needs to hear that love without respect is not really love at all. Remember that the right people will celebrate your achievements, not resent them, and never let anyone make you feel ashamed of success you have earned honestly. Thank you for watching, and I hope this story gives you the courage to demand the respect you deserve from everyone in your life, especially family.